Brad, welcome to That Will Never Work. It's great to have you. I'm excited about this one because if I understand it correctly, the business you're working on is one of those big problems, the problems that it seems like everybody has, which are always so tempting that maybe somebody can finally solve it. So believe me, I am hoping you're the one. But listen, I know enough mystery here. What I would love you to do, Brad, is start off and explain to me what is the problem that you're trying to solve and what are you doing to try and solve it?
Sure. Thank you so much for letting me be a guest on your podcast. So I'm working on an application called New Cards. This is a digital business card application. And the problem I'm trying to solve is how can people share their personal contact information easily, but also make sure they maintain control and have a sense of security. So make sure that their information won't get into the wrong hands. It won't be something that can be taken by hackers, by marketing people, by advertisers, anything like that.
And so, what are you doing about it?
So my app basically allows you to create a new card. It allows you to put your personal information in, and you can share it with other people using a QR code, email link, something like that. The main thing that happens is that there's end-to-end encryption. So when you create your card, everything is encrypted. It uses a public and private key so that the private key stays on your device. The only way to decrypt the information is if you have the other person's public key and then they can decrypt it on their device with their private key. So everything stays nice and secure. The only thing that's on the server is literally just the encoded, encrypted data. So there's nothing that can be read. I can't read anything. No one can, read anything from the database. It requires both parties to have exchanged keys in order to be able to see the information and have it available to them.
And is it a one-time exchange or is this live, continually updated card?
As you make changes to your information, you get a new encryption. So the keys stay the same. So the keys are tied to the device. So your public and private key are created when you first log into the application on a new device. But the information
example,
itself gets.
If I give you my business card and now you have it in your wherever, we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
But you now have my data someplace, and now I all of a sudden change phone numbers. I can update it at my end, and every single person I've given my card to will automatically get an updated phone number in their database. Is that?
That's right. Yes. So updates percolate out to people you have.
So, does this require that both sides have new card?
For the updates to work, yes. So without the updates involved, I do have a mechanism where people can see your information. If they scan it, it goes to a website, but you won't get any updates that way. You can just use the website to call somebody or send an email to them or something. But updates require, yes, that both sides be new cards users and logged into their accounts.
Let's walk through a singular transaction just to make sure I understand, because it's still a little confusing here. So now you and I are at a trade show, and you go. First of all, I can email you this information, I assume, or I can just text you this information, my card. How does the first exchange actually happen? I mean, no one carries business cards anymore, do they? But I assume that's not how this works. It's all digital.
It is all digital.
All right, so let's say, okay, let's start with me. Now, I think this is a cool idea. I don't like having my information all over the place. So I have to now get a copy of New Card, correct? Mm-hmm. And now I go in and I create my data. Easy enough. Now, what's the next step for giving it to you? How do I give it to you? What do you do with it?
So I guess there's two ways you can do it. If you're with a person, so you can do an exchange where someone's right next to you. That can be done either with a QR code, so you can bring up a QR code on your device's screen, and then the other person can scan it with their camera. When they scan it, if they don't have New Cards installed, they're not a New Cards user, then they just get sent to a website with the information. If they are a New Cards user, then the New Cards app launches, you exchange keys, everything is re-encrypted so that that new person can access your information. And everything is basically synced up. So they end up with a received card, which is from you, and you end up with a recipient who shows you who you've given your card to.
Okay, I get it. I have some concerns, but
Okay.
I'm an optimist, so let's keep going here. So tell me where you are so far on this project.
So I've been doing a private beta of it, and I'm actually in the process right now of basically launching a public beta. I've got my server set up. I'm basically getting my account changed over at Apple, so I'm getting pretty much ready for launch. I want to do a lot more, like kind of just extensive testing and making sure everything is happening correctly. That most crucial piece, that exchanging of keys and stuff like that. I mean, it's more complicated than just copying the information over in the clear, right? Like there has to be more that happens. So if that a key exchange doesn't work for some reason, I have to be able to retry, and eventually everything links up with each other. So I'm getting really close. I'm actually at the point where I think it's stable enough and able to go forward to launch.
How big was the private beta?
I guess I had about like 25 people in it, something like that. So,
and basically you were all exchanging cards with each other and updating information.
Right. Mostly with me, but so.
So if I don't have new card, your information just pops up on a website.
On a website, yeah. Right now it does.
Which I can just copy, screenshot, whatever.
If you wanted to, yeah. I guess the way I would put it is, most people nowadays with that, you were talking about the big problem I'm trying to solve here, right? So most people, I think they use kind of what I call a kind of a breadcrumb model to contacts, right? They exchange some piece of information, an email address, a text, a phone number, something like that. And then they just use like their phone's history, right? They go back and look at their prior emails, they look at their prior calls, they whatever. And they just use that piece of information to stay in touch with that person. That's fine until that changes out, right? Until somebody changes their phone number, changes their whatever, right? And if you don't have the information that you think you should have, then you have to go ask for it. And if you're lucky, they'll still be able to get in touch with that person that way. What I do is I make sure that like that connection that you make between you and somebody else, like once that connection is created, now you can use that as a conduit to like feed them new information that you think that they should have. Once if I want to give somebody my private phone number, if I want to give them my private address, something like that, I can do that later on. I don't have to do it right away necessarily. One of the important aspects of this is that once you've got that connection, you see that person as someone who owns your card, that you will be able to give them new information later.
All right, so here's the $6 million question, or the 60 million or 6 billion, depending upon what your aspirations are. Do you envision this replacing the native contact manager software that comes on most phones, computers, etc.?
I would say that it would be a nice supplement to those things. I don't see it becoming like something that would completely replace it. There are aspects of what I can do as a application that, like, I can feed phone numbers into the phone so that you can see it, like for caller ID and things like that. I can bring into the experience you have on the phone some of the information you have from new cards. But the built-in contacts, the built-in, like those things, they tie into all the other applications. And sometimes that can be good, but sometimes it can be bad, right? If you're worried about someone uploading your contacts because they want to use, reach out and do marketing or something like that to everyone you know, New Cards doesn't allow for that, right? You can't have access to the body of contacts through New Cards. So no other third-party application, Apple even, they won't be able to get access to that stuff. It has to be exchanged specifically with another entity, another person.
Okay, just before I have a bunch of questions and direction, but before I do, why don't we try and narrow things down a little bit? What is it that you in particular might want to talk about today?
Well, so one of the aspects I've been building this app on my own. It's been a long time, a side project of mine. I came up with the idea like 10 years ago. So it was something that I had, played with it, and I think it's a good idea. And I'm an iOS developer, so I can build the iOS application, and I've been building the backend servers, I've been building the website, I've been doing all those things. The big question I have is, going forward, I know that the only way to really get, good growth is to be able to like have like say an Android client. Like I need to be able to reach the largest audience I can reach out there. And my question would be that how do I know? So let's say I launch my iOS client, I launch new cards and everything is going okay. And I'm getting some new users coming in and things like that. But I don't know how I would know for sure whether to, really go forward and like try to go to the next step where I would try to bring in new employees and new developers who could help me with the Android side of things, or how do I get in, like say an investor or somebody? Would they be interested in what are the metrics they would be interested in going into something like this?
Okay, that's kind of what I suspected with where you were going with it. So one of the things that I'm curious about is whether this app has utility by itself, or whether it's required to become the default use for managing contacts in order for it to be successful. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? Have you thought about that? And which is it?
I think so. There's always this issue where at first this is obviously an app that benefits most if everyone has it, right? Like so, if you always ran into people that had new cards, it'd be great because then you can make the exchanges easily. If every time you meet somebody new, you have to tell them go download an app, it takes a long time. It's always like that. I am trying to provide at least the ability to do what you can do now, where you can at least bring up a QR code and exchange your information quickly. And then it's available to the other person. And if they have new cards, great. If they don't, they can still gain access to it. It's be the same thing as like getting a V card or something like that, where you can exchange some piece of information that doesn't update, but that's kind of the status quo. And then I want people to, if they find that having the updating and having the security and having all the other things make sense to them, then I'm hoping that they'll tell other people about it, and it'll be able to spread by having other people say, bring in this application, become a member, and then as you get everyone to update to new cards, then your Christmas list will be easy, right? Because everyone will have given you a card and your addresses will all be correct, and you won't have to worry about checking anything because it's all updated for you. I don't think it has to be a replacement, just because I think the best idea is in some ways, I want to always remain separate, because if you think of contacts on most people's phones nowadays, they're really messy, right? You've collected contacts for years. You have no idea if they're good or bad. I don't want to munge together like sort of new cards data, which is sort of meant to be correct. Like it's literally the best information we have from the person who gave you their card, with the contacts that may be on your phone that may be a mess. They may be something that will work, won't work, who knows, right?
When I started off my intro of you saying you're trying to solve a big, big problem, you're really playing in a category of software that every single person uses. Mm-hmm. One of the only really that every single person uses, maybe texting, maybe email, but everyone stores and manages contacts. And because of that, most of the big players have all developed ways to store and manage contacts. Google certainly has their system. Apple, of course, you're familiar with their system for doing so. But even all the subsidiaries platforms do it. You have names stored of your friends in Facebook. You have all of these different ways of storing information. And for you to become yet one more is a really ambitious, really, really challenging thing. But be what it may, you've identified some obvious and key flaws to the existing contact management systems, which is the big one. I would probably say is the updating. Mm-hmm. Is that I have cards in my address book that are clearly out of date. I have cards in my my contact books, which are, as you call them, breadcrumbs. In other words, I only have someone's phone number, but I don't have their email, or I have their email and I don't have their whatever, Twitter or. Mm-hmm. And so these are big fundamental concerns. But the reason I think the single big question here is individual utility versus mass adoption is I think it's going to be almost impossible to get mass adoption. And you have to be extremely careful not to let yourself be drawn into that wonderful fantasy of, won't it be amazing when everybody has this? Mm-hmm. And I've heard that one 600 or 700 times, because basically every person who comes up with a new idea for a social network, which is probably every third person you meet, they all say, just imagine how cool it will be when everybody has this. And I would, of course, have to agree. But of course, getting from where you are to having every single person have it is quite a journey. Mm-hmm. And the only way that journey takes place, in my opinion, is by having there be individual utility. It has to be so good that I'm willing to be the only person on earth who uses this. It solves some big fundamental problem for me, which is why I'm willing to go through all of the jump through all the hoops to get it to work properly, to get it to set up. Otherwise, if there's group utility required, you get into this very messy, almost like a two-sided market problem, where you go, all of the wonderfulness depends on all my friends using it, all my business associates using it, or other people using it. And so this thing has great promise. You've heard amazing things. You download it, you set up your thing, and no one else is giving you their card, so you never take advantage of the updating. No one else, you have 6 people who have your card, so 98% of the people that you deal with every day are not getting your updated information because they're not using. In other words, then you get frustrated and you leave. And despite how for you, New App is the center of your universe, as it should be, getting it to be the center of anyone else's universe is brutally hard. It's not going to be the center of the universe. You're going to get it downloaded. It's going to start off on the home screen of your apps, and then slowly but surely it migrates to the second page, or it goes into the utilities folder, and then that's the end of that. Mm-hmm. So my advice is that the trick to this being successful is you figuring out some way to have individual utility where it's so powerful for you, I'm willing to buy it, use it. It becomes one of my go-to apps because it's doing something for me every day. And off the top of my head, that could be you make it easier to share. You make it easier to whatever. But it has to be something that's good for a person. The alternative is you solve a small group problem incredibly well, like a Slack. Enough so that 4 or 5 people all look each other in the eye and go, okay, listen, we're all going to get New App. Or someone in a corporation in the IT department goes, okay, here are the rules. We're all going to get and use, and that can work too. But those are increasingly hard to make happen. But the better one is individual utility. And then it's individual utility times virality. And it's something which is so good for you, but you naturally are sharing it. In other words, for example, if it is a model that says it's so powerful, I don't care if anyone uses it. It makes it really easy for me to get I'm making this up, I have no idea if it does or not, to get my information out there, but then everyone sees it. It's basically the way when they did free email was, wow, this is awesome for me. It's free email. And lo and behold, at the bottom of every email, it said sent from Hotmail, dating myself here, right. Back in the days when they were the first free email people. Or, I use Superhuman now, and, you have to actively go in and remove the little viral tag that says sent by Superhuman. But then people see it and hopefully do it. And potentially yours could do that. It could spread this way, and little by little, you're correct. But it won't do that unless if it requires, this only works if I've got 25, 24 of my friends using it, you're toast, in my opinion. And so now it's time to put on your product manager hat and go, what can I make this thing do that it works so well that people are going to want it for itself? And then you just begin putting on your product manager hat and say, okay, now I need to begin to engineer in the virality so that it does spread to other people. And each person who gets it has individual utility, so they use it. And then lo and behold, we begin to see that, holy mackerel, it does update between us. And then little by little by little. And for the little by little by little, if you can engineer a niche where it's more natural to spread, you've done it even better. In other words, although the tempting thing is every single person needs this, the odds of people seeing the magic, which is the updating and the security, which requires two people to have the app, those collisions are going to take pretty randomly if it's a product that, what's the world population, 8 billion now? That 8 billion people are out there, and the ones who have it are like oxygen atoms in outer space. It's like they're 1,000 miles apart from each other. That if you have somehow engineered the product to work really well in a certain niche, and again, I'm going to make something crazy up, but it's got some aspect of working really well in real estate, where people are constant. Again, now I'm going out on a limb here, so don't take this literally. But people are constantly trying to figure out what are the lockbox codes, and this thing also, there is some piece of information which is always changing. Mm-hmm. Whereas my phone number doesn't change that often. Either does my email address. Either my job does. Well, not for me, but maybe every 2 or 3 years. In other words, the big power, which is this updating, if that's one of the big powers, you don't get to see that magic happen very often because it doesn't change very often. So pick some narrow category which is hugely change dependent. And everyone's going, oh my God, this is changing every week. How do I keep up with it? Well, it just becomes one of the fields in your address card. And lo and behold, when someone needs to know X, it's automatically updated. I have it all the time. You know what I mean? And then you begin building this universe that's more naturally connected, where the virality will work more quickly, where you'll get to that point where pretty soon everyone has one. And it's just a classic product positioning thing that which is you start in a very narrow subset where you can solve that specific problem really, really well, better than anybody else. Solving generic business cards or contact management software, wow, that's a hard one, because you probably know how many people at Apple are working on their contact manager. You can only imagine how many people at Gmail are working, at Google are working on their contact management software. It's huge. So for you to do it, you've got to pick something so small and so focused that they're never going to do that. They're never going to be that narrow about it. It's like Apple at the beginning saying, this the Mac? Yes, eventually it'd be good if everyone has one. But now, no, the people who should buy it are art departments because of the fonts. And that's it. And then once you're in the art departments, it spreads to the other departments that are favoring that. And you don't get to accounting, because that's how IBM's domain for 15, 20 years. It's fine. Take your time. You get there eventually. Okay. Yeah, you got me on a roll here. Remind me in a second. I want to come back to that question of what do I want to prove at the beginning? Because I do have a very good answer for that. But I had to hammer you on this being too big. Let's jump right into that one. Okay, so what do you aim for? I don't think you have to worry about Android yet, in my opinion. There are plenty of people that need what you have in the iOS environment. Unless you ignore everything I'm saying and say, no, this only works if every single person in the world has it, in which case Oh, absolutely. You should. You should. Then you should do them both. But I just think that's crazy, and it's a huge illusion of effort. I mean, I used to be a fairly heavy user of Clubhouse, and Clubhouse was Apple only, iPhone only for a long time, and that was plenty big for them to get a lot of traction, a lot of heat, a lot of movement, and then eventually they did build out the Android, and lots of companies start on one platform, because that's not the reason it's not going to work. I mean, how many iPhones are out there? 400 million? I don't know. I don't know what the numbers are. Billion. Some huge number. If that's not enough, you've got a different problem. Because if you're saying it only works if 100% of the people have my app, then you're screwed to begin with. So don't worry about it. What you're looking for is engagement, in my opinion, which is, do people engage regularly with this product? And if you measure as you launch into public beta, and I assume because you're an iOS developer, you have wonderful ability to capture engagement metrics. What you want is positive engagement, not negative engagement, which is, you can measure it any way you want, but basically you want those numbers to start going up week over week over week, not going down week over week over week over week. You want people to be discovering it and finding new uses for it on an, again, individual utility. The second thing I'd be trying to do is figure out, how do I get virality going? And virality is going to be measured two ways. Is does someone who they share their contact information with download the app? And do they get engagement? And so those are such big dynamic things. You've got to figure out that this thing works. And I don't mean works technically, which is a lot of the stuff you were explaining to me. You've got to make sure that the usage dynamics work. And that's the part that I'm suspicious of. And if I was an investor, I'd be more than suspicious. I'd be dismissive of. This can't be a hand-waving, imagine if you will, product. This has to be, look at what happens. Look at the engagement for the people who try me. And for every person who tries me, they share it with 40 other people. And of those 40, 6 of them download and engage. And believe me, any VC can do that math. And it's very compelling. Who cares whether you make money at it right now? You have to stumble on the engagement virality piece. And until you do that, it's going to end up being a very, very cool product that no one ever uses. But again, this is a superficial call in some ways, because you might find a narrow niche. You might find a small subset group that needs it desperately because they have some driving need for continually updating information that they'd want to store in their contact file. But it's all going to be measured on, is this thing worth it to someone so that they download it and use it? If the only use is, I'm going to download this because all of a sudden all these people wait, there's no one else using it. Okay, done. The last piece, and I'm sorry, I haven't even let you talk at all, but you planted a perfect seed for me to pontificate about something I actually feel passionate about. The reason, again, I started off this whole conversation with big problem is I hate contact management software. I'm always looking for a better solution. I am like primo customer number one. I have some contact information which is stored in my Apple. I have some stuff which is stored in Gmail. They don't talk to each other. It's not updated. Listen, I'm your guy. But because I'm your guy, I also know how many times this has been tried. And listen, you began working on this 10 years ago. Wasn't there a product about 10 years ago where it automatically updated
There have been lots of efforts at this. It's totally true. There are products now that do this update piece. And, for me, I think the big thing, about a year ago, I was actually going to launch without the security piece, without the encryption. And when I was talking to some other people and I mentioned I wanted to add encryption, that's when they got excited. They were like saying like, oh, like my information is going to be encrypted and only the people I share with will be able to access it. And when I realized that that was a possibility, that they could have some safety and security with that, I decided at that point that I wanted to add this as a first tier feature as opposed to like trying to do it as an add-on later on. I think that there's been, I think, a lot of instances where people have been kind of burned a little bit, where, they give out some piece of information that they want to get something else, and then they start receiving junk mails or, other unsolicited calls and things like that. And they have no idea how that information then gets spread afterward. For me, I think that you should know who has your information, and you should be able to manage that yourself. You should be able to control that information and what information they have.
Yeah, and the challenge, of course, is that for them to be able to have your information, they need to have your app, or to have it with the security pieces, and that's the part that I'm concerned with. And if the updating isn't the secret sauce, if the security is, then what I've said is still legitimate. You just need to change out every place I said updating and swap in security. But fundamentally, if you are really careful and you want to only protect your information, letting me to see it on a website doesn't really help. I mean, I guess it prevents me from having a copy unless I actively make one. But what I would do is I would just copy your information and stick it into my regular address book, because I don't think it's a reasonable premise to think I'm going to have one app, which is for my 17 contacts who are secure, and another app for the whatever the number is, 2,000 people who don't.
I think in my mind, I'm thinking that every so often you hear on the news how some big company gets hacked by somebody and they download their database and millions of customers' private information is left to, who knows what happens to it, right? In my case, none of that information is available. Like I said, I couldn't even look up, if you had a card and you shared it with somebody else, I couldn't look up any of their information in any way. And so that's the security that you get. It's not encrypted on the device. You have access to it, and yes, when you call, or it'll be in your history and things like that. But in the meantime, you don't have to worry about a large number of people all suddenly getting all their information stolen at once. If a hacker has to go through one by one and break every single person's encryption, it would take them forever. So
true. So I could, in other words, steal someone's address book, and if they had their address book with you, they couldn't do. Oh, okay. We're going to get into a technical piece that I'm going to totally put my foot in my mouth from not being a security expert. But I still stand by, I think, some of the things that I've kind of coached you on here, right, which is that be really careful about group utility being the only driver. It's well, I'll say it. It's death. So I think, but if you can figure out a way to have an individual go, this is incredibly cool for me to use, then when it spreads virally, each person it spreads to doesn't have to have the disappointing experience of going, well, no one else is using this, so none of the features that seem really cool work. They go, no, all these features that have individual utility, they work. Wow, this is really cool. And then a little by little, you begin to discover, wow, more and more people using it. And all of a sudden, that group stuff that you lie awake dreaming about how cool it will be when everyone has this thing start to become real. But in the meantime, raising money, making decisions about when do you expand to a new platform, how do you allocate resources, how quickly do I grow, how much do I ever spend money on marketing, God forbid. Don't do any of that stuff until you've demonstrated you have engagement. I think that is your driving big metric, followed closely by how viral you can make it. You should be able to. Viral should be the easier part, but the individual utility is the trickier one.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, Brad, have I scared the crap out of you?
Well, I've got some work to do, that's for sure. So.
Well, if you don't need to do anything different, except maybe if you follow the advice, you'll watch what happens when you enter your private beta a little more carefully. You'll watch and see who uses it in a vacuum. You'll see how it spreads and what happens as it spreads. And I think now that it's a public beta, that will be interesting. And you may want to open the beta up and say, every person who gets this part of the invitation public beta, automatically can invite somebody else.
Right, yeah.
So it doesn't need to all go through you, where you almost curate a closed group. Because I want you to see what happens when it's not a closed group.
Right, yeah. I've known the people who are in my private beta were my friends, my family. They would have downloaded anything, didn't matter. When it comes to the public beta,
about friends and family?
well, they're usually pretty forgiving of me. So, but with the public beta, that's where I really want to see, because I'm very interested to see like who not only uses it but actually recommends it, and
yep,
certainly,
and the people who get recommended to, what happens with them?
Right? Do they go through
cool.
that process?
Cool, Brad.
So.
The good news is you have the technical chops to make all this happen. The other good news is I think you've got a good enough product mind to envision some ways to make this useful individually, and or to find pre-populated groups that are inclined to adopt it as a group. And I hope you stumble on it, if for no other reason than it would make my life a lot easier.
I hope I do too.
Good luck.
All right, thank you.